Hey everyone, welcome to another fabulous episode of Howdy Partner. My name is James Spencer, your host, and one of the producers here on Howdy Partner. What is Howdy Partner? Howdy Partner is our weekly Twitch show that we do on AWS where we bring our partners on. They come on and tell us what makes them different, what makes them great. They show us what they do and tell us their stories. Today, we have special guest Slalom as part of our SaaS mini-series we did. And joining me today, again, awesome, because he's the SaaS expert at AWS, is Mr. Peter. Let me bring Peter on here. How you doing?
Hey, James. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
I'm a partner solution architect with the AWS SaaS Factory. Work with partners who are going through a SaaS transformation. And Slalom is an awesome partners of ours that work with our customers, and really excited to have them here today to talk about their SaaS practice.
Nice. Awesome. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it too, because Slalom, if anyone's familiar with Slalom, they're, one of the biggest out there for sure. So I don't have anything else to say. People don't want to hear me talk. They're not here. I'm here every week. With that, experts. why don't we bring our partners from Slalom on, and then we can go and introduce them. There's Grace. There's Carol. Let me bring everyone on. Sorry, this is taking me a second because I'm traveling, so I'm on my little laptop today. And there we are. Great. I guess we'll just start at first we'll just go on the top this way. Grace, you want to tell us, and then we can just kind of go down. Tell us what's so great.
Hello. Yeah, thanks for having us. We're very excited to be here. I guess we're going to go around and everyone's going to have a chance to introduce themselves. But I guess just as a high-level intro on who Slalom is, we are a consulting company that does a whole gamut of services from business advisory and consulting around how to make the most of your business and your opportunities that are in front of you, all the way through technology consulting and data consulting about how you start to make a plan to execute on those visions and goals. And we are a local focused hub and spoke kind of model where we have lots of local presence in different cities. And then we also have a scaled engineering and technology delivery team that can show up in mass and help move projects quickly. So lots of different ways that we can show up and help clients in different aspects. My name is Grace Miller. I have been at Slalom for about 4.5 years. And I'm a product strategist here. And a fun fact about none has ever stuck to me. So if we come up with one, a nice one, hopefully, maybe we'll change that here today. But that's a fun fact about me. And I will hand it over to Carol.
Thanks, Grace. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carol Conover, a colleague of Grace and everyone here at Slalom. I've been with Slalom almost 7 years. And my focus since I've been with Slalom and complementing what I've done pretty much my entire career is product management, product strategy. So I've been able to focus as I've been with Slalom, working with clients across all different markets and industry and digital solutions, whether it be e-commerce, in direct to consumer, or B2B kinds of spaces, in manufacturing kinds of conditions with clients, thinking about digital strategy and kind of the big what, the big why, and making sure, you know, we're building the right thing for the right reasons at the right time and the right people.
Great. Awesome. Todd, who are you?
Hi, I'll go next. So hi, I'm Todd. So Carol does some of the other W's. I do the who. So I'm focused on who we're going to build this thing for, and you know, like what would make them excited about it, and then how it all works together. But again, I'm Todd. I'm the experience architect. I've been with Slalom for 3 years, and then before that, did 10 years in innovation. And so I have feelings about how all of this comes together, and I'll be voicing all of that throughout all of this. And I'll pass it on to Danius.
Awesome. Well, hello, howdy, I should say. I'm Danius Williams. I'm here as a business architect. Very excited to be here. A little bit about me, I'm in my 2nd year at Slalom. Background is a little bit all over the place at both enterprise, so for-profit, nonprofit work. But my focus is really the people and the process. So we'll dig into that a little bit in our convo, but excited for it. Thank you for having me.
Nice. Thank you. Sam, how are you doing?
Hi, everybody. My name is Sam Strickler. I've been with Slalom now for, I guess, 9 years. And I'm coming to you as a solution owner, which in Slalom lingo is somebody who's helping us tie everything we do for our client partners together into a cohesive experience. And I'm also responsible for managing the backlog of requirements and designing intake with clients and leading our engineering delivery team. So that's kind of my focus. Excited to be here.
Awesome. Great. And last but not least, Jeremiah, how you doing down there?
I'm doing great, thank you. So hello, everyone. My name is Jeremiah Dangler. I've been with Slalom for over 8 years, and during that time, I've focused on building multi-tenant SaaS products, primarily on AWS during that time. And so I'm super excited to talk to everyone about what we're offering today. And so I don't leave my favorite colleague, Grace Miller, hanging with a fun fact, because I think she shared a fun fact. Before I came to Slalom, I was a professor at a university, and I taught computer science. So my little fun fact.
Awesome. What university?
Jeremiah.
Yeah. It was East Tennessee State University. I'm originally from Georgia, moved to Tennessee for about 10 years, and loved it in that area. They had a really great applied computer science program, and it really got me into software engineering. That's how I'm here today.
That's great. Yeah, thank you all for coming today. I guess we started off last week with this, and I guess we'll start off this week with this. SaaS can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. The most common, if you talk to the most common layperson, what SaaS is, the first things that might come to mind to them are Gmail or Photoshop, or those are the big 2 examples I always use. But obviously, it's way, way more than that. Grace, tell us what is SaaS, like kind of tell us what we're going to be talking about today from that high level.
Yeah, for sure. When we are talking about SaaS, really what we're talking about is a cloud native approach to building software that can be made available to clients and customers via a subscription model, so that you can tier your services and features, you can create different price points, you can have multi-tenancy, so that there's different ways to access and use your software. It's a way for the business to scale and a way for the customers to have exactly what they need, exactly when they need it, and not more, not less. And so it's a mechanism for deploying that kind of strategy effectively and efficiently, I'd say.
Awesome. What do you think, Peter? What?
How about the delivery model? I mean, so we talk about it's a subscription base. Jim's kind of said Adobe, right? We touched on this as well. Adobe went through a big transformation overall. What does SaaS mean for a business that's going through a transformation that wants to get to that model?
Yeah, I can take in that a bit. A lot of the things that we're seeing these days is companies are taking their products that may traditionally live on-prem, and so as part of their modernization effort, they might consider SaaS turning it into a SaaS product and typically move into the cloud. And so like a delivery model or a deployment model for SaaS products can vary depending on the product and the client. It could be all the way from we want to deploy this instance of the product into your environment, into your data center on your infrastructure, to we want to run this into a shared AWS environment that multiple customers might run their version of the product out of. And so there's multiple delivery and deployment models depending on kind of the need of the business and the need of the product.
I love the way you kind of describe that. For us at SaaS Factory, we have a phrase that says there's no blueprint for SaaS, and there's no one size fits all for SaaS, right? Every customer, every enterprise have different requirements, what they need. The deployment model may be different. Their business goal will be different. So yeah, absolutely agree.
Awesome. With that, I will somewhat turn it over to the Slalom partners. Today you wanted to talk, amongst many other things, the PEM delivery process. And apparently in this process, there's quite a few steps. I think that's why we have 6 different people here today. So with that, would you like to start there, or we can start somewhere else
Sure.
if you had something else in mind?
Yeah, let's jump into that. So PEM is just our acronym for the product engineering methodology that Slalom uses. And at its heart, at its core, it's an agile software delivery methodology, similar to many. The way that we think about the SaaS acceleration, when we're talking about how do we help businesses accelerate specifically on this journey, we're thinking about it in 4 primary phases, 3 that we're going to talk about today, and then the 4th that follows. At a high level, we're talking about a business planning phase and really the assessment of what is the market opportunity for this transformation and what will this transformation entail for your business. The second phase is the product strategy, sharpening of the pencil phase, where we're thinking about, all right, now if we were going to move forward with this, how would we think about non-technical or non-functional requirements rather? How would we start to think about the architecture at a high level? How would we start to think about the pricing models and sharpen the pencil on the customer research, et cetera? And then the third phase, before we moved into the building of it, would be how are we going to build incremental milestones of value so that we're not waiting a long period of time, if this is a long journey, to get to value for the business and to get to value for the customer. So it's that, all right, now that we understand what we're doing, let's stripe it or phase it in a way that's going to make sense and have value. And there is a teamed approach to all of this. And what's one of the unique things about Slalom, as we said at the beginning, is we have the competency all the way from the business advisory all the way through the technical. We can show up the way that we are today as one cohesive team rather than in silos. So while it's not unique to say, yeah, we need to have a business model and we need to have a technical architecture, what is unique is thinking about those things together as a team. And so we show up with product strategy, business strategy, experience, design, business architecture, solution ownership, and technical architecture together in lockstep. And so we said, what better way than to show up here and talk about it today as a team, because that's how we'd really do it, and walk you through those phases. And then that 4th phase that I'm alluding to is then we get in there and start building the thing in 2-week sprints with agile teams that are cross-functional, et cetera, which is a pretty normalized now way of building software. But we would love to walk through some of those 3 phases, adding our own flavors to what would my role be looking at during this phase, and answer any questions that people have along the way. So with that, okay. Carol, who's our business strategist, is gonna jump in and talk about, and then we'll all collaborate, but on how do we go into that first, is this a good idea for your business? Where do you get started?
Yeah, thanks, Grace. Yeah. And so just thinking about kind of walking it left to right, if you will, starting at the beginning. Ideas can come from anywhere in the organization, as it should. It may be from executive leadership, where what we may be most used to when we think about things, but it could also come from, anywhere in technology experience. It also may come from the front lines, people working customer service that are talking to customers day in and day out, helping them with their problems, and they see an opportunity that a company should pursue. I think the number one thing to dispel is like business planning is not a finance only kind of activity. It's not just finance and like product management. What we believe at Slalom and beyond Slalom and clients and customers that we work with, it should be truly cross-functional if you're doing it well, and you're going to get the robust results from business planning that you should do. And so what Grace talked about with these major phases of PEM that we like to follow with Slalom, it's all truly cross-functional, and business planning's no different. You should have finance, you should have product, like someone like myself, but then, you also should have operations at the table. You obviously should have IT, numerous folks from IT, and then you also should have operations, security. And it's not making it this, 3-month endeavor, but just having a nice 360 of how you're thinking about the opportunity. Because business planning, really simply, it's all about, should you do the thing? Should you do this? We're considering this idea. And it's like my mom always says, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. So it's kind of taking that. It's like, this is the should. And so when you come out of business planning, you feel good and you don't know all the answers, but you have a degree of confidence that, yes, we should move on and we should shape this, kind of as Grace was saying, and the next stage we'll talk about in a little bit. And we should put more meat on these bones because there's a there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I think it's very, it goes back to Grace talking about a cross-functional team and having this full team there at some capacity throughout the whole process. Like, we're there to partner with each part of those entities inside the business. And so you have IT representation, you have business representation, strategy, experience, all those things need to be considered from the beginning. That's why I think it's important to have the roles and the capabilities represented.
Yeah. And a lot of us have gone through this, obviously with clients, and a lot of us have been in industry before we come to Slalom as a professional services professional. It's a little redundant, but as a consultant, we're super professional. So a lot of us have done this. We've lived it, and we kind of have some of that scar tissue that we've learned from and has really contributed to our own point of view. And talking about business planning before talking about some of the parts and pieces, just as a whole, it looks really different company to company. And you can be in a certain vertical like financial services, manufacturing, and it can be very different even in that, area of a market or a vertical. And I think when you have an idea and you're super excited about it and you're going to do the business planning, you need to be aware of what that expectation is, wherever you are, whatever enterprise you're in. Some are really rigid. There's a lot of rigor. You need to put together a deck. You need to not only do your financial projections, but of course you've got to fold in costs. And we want to see projections over a 5-year time period. We want to see internal rate of return. How long is it going to take to pay back this capital investment? Like, I've worked with clients where we have multi-slide decks just of numbers and breakdowns, and you're really beating it up to make sure that this is worth pursuing as an endeavor based on what it's going to take from the enterprise. And then I've worked with other clients and lived it myself in industry where for a fiscal year you're allotted a bucket of money as a leader and you're accountable for outcomes. But how you do those outcomes and how whatever you fashion to realize that, like, that's up to you and that's on you. Here's your bucket of money, go. So just going into it, being really aware of the expectation, and if there are thresholds you need to hit, just knowing that going in.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really good that Slalom, when you guys engage your partners, like Jeremiah, you were saying, the different groups goes in and have those conversations. I think a lot of times when an enterprise or a company that's deciding to go to the SaaS, they may be focused on one part of the transformation, totally miss or kind of downplay the other part. And having those conversations will kind of highlight that. And I love it when I get a customer and they start talking. Like I'm a facilitator of the conversation, right? Because then at that point I know that I made a light bulb go off. So I'm sure you guys see that quite a bit as well in your engagements and conversations.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Peter, just kind of, riffing on that a little bit. And James, if you don't mind to be so kind as to share the screen that I have for this. And this is no fancy industry standard. This is kind of, Carol's doodle, if you will, based on experience and scar tissue and just kind of outlook on the world. But, Peter, thinking about that and like enterprise objectives, you may be considering this in a SaaS kind of capacity and offering based on certain motivations. Obviously, there's revenue growth, there's profitability, there's sales opportunities. Also, it may be cost reduction, or it may be other things like risk reduction. You may be coming off of the heels of, some kind of security event where there's been a compromise, and okay, we really need to think about like how we're offering this and really reevaluate the options, because, these are vulnerabilities, and there may be, some very real advantages to going this route for security purposes. So, this is just a quick little 4-layer doodle that I like to use, just kind of on the fly with clients and kind of getting oriented, especially when first meeting them. And at the top, that's really what we're thinking about. You really want to start with what is the big driver, or what are the big motivations at the company level. And then, after that, it's I have the little wizard there. It's really the vision. I like to call it the Gandalf factor. It's kind of fun. And it's about what is the vision. And I have that above roadmap and like prioritize backlogs, because, and like, this is old hat. We've all seen it. We've lived it if we've been in industry and working with clients. Like a lot of times there are very detailed roadmaps, very detailed plans, and detailed prioritized backlogs, but it kind of ends up being a laundry list of stuff that doesn't really culminate, and it doesn't really come together to tell a story or to ladder back up to the big why. So honing in on the vision, and I'm sure Todd, you can talk about this a ton more, but thinking about who you're targeting and what the value proposition is, how are they going to value it so that you can do this pricing in like a value-based kind of way. Like, how does this align to your brand? This all crystallizes the vision that really should be threaded all throughout like the entire sequence of phases of getting something really live and offered to your customers.
Great.
Yeah.
Carol, sorry if it doesn't break away from what you're trying to say. Is there a way you could zoom in a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. If that's a little better.
Yeah.
Okay.
Look
Is
at
that
that.
better?
Yeah.
Awesome. You didn't want to get the magnifying glass and like that's
I mean, I could, but
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a little old school. But yeah, no, and just making room for all my folks here on the line to jump in. Don't want to kind of blabber on, but I think the vision, I get really passionate about it as a business strategist and a product management, person, because it just seems like 9 times out of 10, that vision part is either really thinly defined, or it's missing completely, and everyone skates from like, we need to increase sales, we need to gain market share, we need to get more customers, we need to reclaim customers, and like you go to the roadmap of just kind of things they're doing, you really end up with a huge chasm between what the thing was supposed to do to begin with and when it starts to go out the door. We see that all the time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree.
I mean, that's sort of the job of the experienced person. To kind of like make that viable or interesting or fun or any of those things. And so like, I think that's, in my experience, it starts off really simple at that first stage where we're talking about right now, where it's maybe a comic book or it's some other thing that tries to pull away from like that business plan, so that there is sort of a narrative to it. So it's something that's lovable. We talk about like the most lovable product instead of the most valuable product. And so it's like, there's something that you should, in going in this, because this is a painful process, no matter how you do it. And so like, you should fall in love with the idea and the idea should be interesting and fun. And so we start from there. And so interesting, fun isn't customer retention. Interesting and fun is we're going to give you something so that you come and hang out with us. And so what is that something, and how does that work?
Yeah.
And at these early stages, the whole point is really keeping it rough, because what we're going to do later on, and I'm jumping ahead, but we'll circle back. It's fine. This is flexible. But at some point, we'll go talk to people, and we're going to learn some things, and they're going to upend all of our decisions that we made in some boardroom, and then we'll flip it, and it'll be way more interesting. And so don't spend a ton of time making it beautiful or making it rigorous or any of that stuff here. Here, it's really just we need a story. We need a general idea of why we're doing it. And we have a general idea of like a swag on whether or not this thing will make us any money. Yeah. And with that, then we can move forward in the process.
Yeah. And go ahead, Carol.
Oh no, I was just gonna, and Todd just driving that home, like I've done this in my past, like things like rapid prototyping, even if it's low fidelity or if it's something maybe you put into the wild in a production kind of environment, and leveraging these kinds of capabilities to get it out to a segment of an audience to kind of test those waters during business planning. That's people don't usually think about doing that in business planning, but that's huge because then you can get a sense for the emotion this is invoking, what this is tapping into that you're trying to get to. And again, getting to that value proposition. And then, okay, now we have a better idea of really what the price point is and what the value is, not just doing like cost plus pricing or competitive, like how can we really price this based on the value is driving?
Yeah. And part of that, right, is like getting that buy-in, right? We would do that so that people kind of get a greater sense for what is it that we're trying to do. Something that I might also consider that sometimes some organizations don't tend to do at this phase of the journey is actually starting to consider that people side. In other words, these are all great ideas, but who in fact are going to be or is going to be that key champion? Who's going to be the guy, gal who's like carrying the torch for the thing, who's saying, yes, I'm going to fight to the end to see this thing through. You want that identified at the beginning, especially during that business planning portion. So they are a part of those conversations and really obviously can communicate the value and the importance. And the reason too, right, you want to identify that person is because you also want to understand why would this matter to them, right? If they're going to be the champion and the torch carrier, how does this impact them, their role potentially? How do their performance metrics tie into this? What are they being held accountable to? Because ultimately, yes, there might be an enterprise level reason for this, but the person carrying the torch, there are some reasons to pay attention to why this matters to them. What are some potential motivations, right? You ultimately also want to understand, like, does this person have the level of influence needed to get the yes? Or if they're able to make the decision, is there a capability of making the decision the full scope that you're looking at, right? Because you want to have an understanding of that. Is the scope that we're going after actually going to end up being a much smaller scope? And then how does that change our potential, vision and potential goals and outcomes? I think it's such an important part to actually bring in that individual at this phase and start that going so that you really know that the leadership is there that's going to be helping to ensure that this thing is going to be successful.
Yeah, I will double down on that, Danius, and say it's helping our customers and clients understand where they are organizationally is an often neglected and very critical piece of what we do, because it is one of the key factors of whether you're going to go fast or slow. How efficiently do you make decisions? How aligned are you as an executive team? Are you all holding the same North Star? Are you all holding a different North Star in your pocket and not even really aware of it? And so we have some organizational deficiencies or opportunities for modification that would speed you on this journey that have nothing necessarily to do with the technology challenges in front of you. And technology is not the hard part. It's the people, the hard part. So how do you all get rowing in the same direction early? it's really just a key part of it. I agree.
Yeah. Something actually you just made me think of is you spoke to
Carol,
this just a little bit ago. Oh, I'm so sorry, Grace. I think the internet might be lagging just
No,
a
I think
bit.
I have a lag. You're
but-
good. You're good.
Oh, okay. I'm so sorry. What I was going to share is, that is also the benefit of this full cross-functional team coming in to support this initiative is, I don't know if y'all have ever been a part of something like this type of implementation, and it's a massive undertaking, right? Is you almost need these different layers, not only to make sure that each component is addressed and supported, but to be part of that connective tissue to bring it all together and make sure that, we're really looking at this full scope and helping the organization begin to bring all these pieces together.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we've talked a lot about, and Jeremiah, I'm sure you and Sam also, you guys may have some great thoughts on this, of course, because talking cross-functionally, this is all about the yay raws. And like, we should do this because it's so exciting and it's going to be amazing and it's compelling. And these customers are going to love this. But then there's also the other half or the other aspect of this. Okay, what's it going to take? Wait, how are we going to do this? What's it going to cost? What does the architecture look like? Are we going to need, other partners, other licenses? So I don't know, Jeremiah, if you wanted to jump in with some thoughts on that.
Yeah, and a lot of those decisions will begin to form in the early parts of the project or engagement so that you understand the deployment model and the cost model that could have an impact on how you might ultimately build the solution, how you might deploy it. And so an example of that is if you need to have a version of your product that can be deployable to a customer's infrastructure or customer's data center, then you may have to choose a container-based solution. But if it's going to be completely offered in the cloud and you take more of an approach that Atlassian is moving to as an example, where they're forcing all of their users to move to a cloud instance, you might be able to take advantage of cloud native technologies, which will help you build it out faster, run it more cost efficiently, scale it to meet your customer needs easier. And so there's a lot of those things that kind of have to come out of the early phases of the engagement to understand what the future could be. And so that future state architecture can be heavily influenced throughout the business process before you even get to the detailed architecture and the estimation.
We have a saying in our team that SaaS is a team sport. I think all of you are kind of touching on that fact. Jeremiah, you just said it, right? The business decision is going to have an impact on the architecture, and it can't really get into architecture without that feedback from the business. So it's really just a full circle, and the organization has to come together to figure out what it is that they're looking to build. Todd, like you said, what can I do to get people excited about this product at the end of hang out with us afterwards?
Yeah.
I would say, I would just add too that you said come together to build, but it's also operate, right? I think you think about we're talking about the business strategy and the why, and having exposure to or trying to make the recognition to the organization and the partner that we're with to figure out where the SaaS transition is going to impact them. But at the end of the day, it's everywhere. And part of it that I'm thinking about is from a developmental from a development ways of working standpoint, it really permeates everywhere in the business. So it's not only the build, but it's how we're going to operate this thing, how we're going to pull all the different pieces and parts of the organization to be more metrics driven as we're thinking about a SaaS product. There's so many different ways that it impacts a client that they're probably not aware of or maybe ready for if this is their first time going on a SaaS journey. So lots of work to go on, if we're thinking about partnering on the journey.
For sure. And I think on business planning, again, contrary to popular belief, this is a really fun phase. Business and fun don't always go hand in hand, but this is actually a fun phase to talk about. We could talk about it for a long time together, but to kind of bring, this first phase home. But Sam, that was awesome, talking about metrics, thinking about what the desired outcomes really are from this concept and this offering that you're thinking about. We've already been touching on it, but gonna get a little controversial here, and thinking about go to market. Go to market, typically folks think about that as we're halfway through development, we're 3/4 way. We should probably start thinking about launch and go to market. It's kind of ideally, no. Like ideally, you're starting that thought during business planning. And you know, I'm not talking about a humongous spreadsheet of like all of the bits and pieces for go to market, but that should be part of the business planning, kind of like Sam and Jeremiah, y'all were talking about. Like, how are we going to get this out to customers? Like, what's the value proposition? Again, like, what's sales readiness? And I know, Danius, you can talk a ton about that. But, like, if this is our first SaaS offering endeavor, like our sales team, probably they need to be ready to talk about this. And our customer base may not be used to thinking about us in this way. And so just thinking about like the go-to-market, so you can start doing that in parallel as you're doing development, so that it's not like a mad rush, obviously, at the end before you're ready for launch and marketing.
Yeah, I double down on that because you're making one of my scars itch a little bit, where we build out a plan and architecture based on what we did in the business process without a go-to-market plan. And when we start the go-to-market plan, it's like we're working with the account folks in the business and actual people selling the product. And they're like, I can't sell that product. And so like you have to completely replan, well, I wouldn't say re-architect, continue to evolve your architecture. And if you miss that up front, it can be a huge headache once you get into implementation.
Yeah, I have another scar that usually comes in that phase too. While we're doing scars, those are fun. So with a lot of the, oh, should we do fun facts? I could do a fun fact if you want to do that. I'll start with scars and then I'll do a fun fact at the end. So a common scar at this moment is when I work with customers, and I'll use a more specific example. Like there's a number of SaaS products that I've worked with that are in healthcare, and so they're like add-ons to insurance, or they're like a doctor finder, or it's like an add-on to let's just use that. So it's a doctor finder. So you, awesome SaaS guy, have decided that you're going to make a doctor finder, and you're going to go sell it to every insurance company under the sun, or at least in North America, or at least in the US. And so that's awesome. And so your go-to-market strategy is, we're going to make a SaaS product. It's going to be a one-size-fits-all, and it's going to be amazing. And all we have to do is just put in the data, and we're off to the races, and we can charge a bunch of money per client. What winds up happening on the other side is when your sales folks get involved, they realize that every single implementation has to be custom, because every single customer wants their own version of it. And then all of a sudden you go from being a SaaS company to being a custom software company. And your pricing model that you came up with in this phase makes zero sense. And so this is a really good place where you can have those conversations, and you can bring in sales early and go, oh, wait, we may be not right for this. This might not be the right way to do it. And it's way easier to figure that out now than it is 4 years from now, when you're losing money on every sale because of that. But this is a really common issue, says the designer. Oh, fun fact. So I'm going to make sure that everyone does this. So this is my fun fact. So in my 20s, I was a DJ. I traveled the world. But my fun fact on that is that I opened for Moby, and now I have his haircut.
If you do some creative searching, you can probably find some videos of Todd DJing too.
Yeah, it's not very hard to find.
Was the haircut by design, or just happened?
You know, genetics are cruel.
Yeah, awesome. Hey, if you're just tuning in right now, welcome to Howdy Partner. It's our weekly Twitch show that we do here on AWS, where we bring partners on to talk about their solutions, talk about their integrations, talk about what differentiates them and makes them special. Today, I'm joined by Slalom, one of our SaaS competency partners here, one of the best, one of the biggest. They're telling us all about their PEM delivery model, and they're teaching us how and why. And if SaaS is the right thing for you, as Todd just said, right tool for the right job. That's one of our ongoing themes on this show that we always have. That's among the many. We have the known unknowns, unknown unknowns, and we have the right tool for the right job. Lots of those themes.
Awesome. Well, we just finished wrapping up the phase around the business planning, and there's lots of times where at the end of that phase, you actually do a go, no go. and decide, based on what we understand the cost to be at this time, the opportunity to be, what it is, what it isn't, what our vision is. We put all that together and we say, okay, are we going to go forward to the next phase? There are other times when the train is moving and this is an important step, but there's not a pause between this step and the next step, which is really the product strategy phase. And it kind of just depends on where you are in the journey and what kind of assessment, and what Carol was talking about earlier about the different kinds of leadership and requirement. Want to move very quickly and a bias for speed, and they kind of zoom right through and say, okay, now we understand it, but we're going to keep going. And I would say the next phase is really about, when you think about what's the opportunity coming out of that first phase, a lot of assumptions go into that because you're trying to time box it. You're not going to spend forever in analysis. You want to understand it and move. So you make a lot of assumptions, and when you think about the value chain of like, if we do this, then these dominoes will fall. There are assumptions baked into all of those. And so this phase is really about de-risking the assumptions. So you have to understand them a little bit better. For example, we've assumed that customers' behaviors will trend this way if we do this thing. We've assumed adoption at a rate of this based on these preliminary understandings of segmentation. And so this phase is it's sharpening on who is the customer. As Todd, maybe that's probably the most important place to start, is like, who are we actually talking about and what is the value? But then also on the technical side as well, of like, how do we really understand what it would take and what are the other kinds of requirements that maybe we didn't have a chance to look at in that first phase.
Yeah.
But Todd, maybe you'd share a little bit about like how you go get smarter on that.
Totally. And in fact, I've had many go, no go based off of my work. And so like I have another, if we're doing scars, another fun scar was in this next phase. I went and I did global research to discover if there was a market for this thing, and came back and said no. And then leadership didn't love that answer. And so I did a second round of global research just to verify, and came back with another no. And then we killed the project. And I always love to say that it's way better to go spend, $250,000 in global research than it is to go spend $50 million to set up a factory. And so it's not a bad answer. But the big idea on this phase, from my standpoint, is we've got to categorically understand who the customer is, which is fine. But then once we've figured that out at that high level, it's really important to go in the field and learn a little bit more about them and bring their stories back to the table, essentially. And so in more rigorous ways of doing that, it requires that you go out a lot and you talk to a lot of people. In less rigorous, you could get away with 6 to 12 people and learn their stories and bring it back. But this is where we're bringing together a really rough idea. I always tell my designers that I don't want them to spend a lot of time making it beautiful. I just want to get the idea across so they don't fall in love with it. Because if they fall in love with it, we can't test it, because they're going to bring their baby out into the world and then it's going to get yelled at, and nobody likes that. So keep it rough, find out the truth, and then bring it back and synthesize it, and then tell us what happened. And so that's a very high level way of saying you go off and you talk to customers and you find out how they behave today and if this thing will intersect with any of that behavior. And if so, we're rocking. Then we've got a thing we can go make. And if not, then we've got to come back and rethink some of our strategy. So at this phase, that's kind of the moves that you make. And then ultimately coming out of that, I should have a pretty good idea of who our customer is and how they behave. And I should be able to act like a method actor within all of the meetings that we have from that point forward. And I can say, whatever it is, Mark wouldn't like that because Mark really liked the other thing, or whatever it is. But that's sort of our role at that point.
Yeah.
Todd, as you go through that design phase, you're having the conversation, trying to figure out what Mark likes today.
Yeah,
right? What are your experience in terms of, after you have the product launched, Mark changes what he likes and he likes something else a year from now, right? That's going to be that's a cycle that you kind of have to kind of build into, collecting that feedback and evolving as your users evolve.
Oh yeah, you're jumping me ahead. But
Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's good. So the other thing that's magic about a SaaS product is that it's always running and it's always morphing and changing based on customer need and behavior. So we'll talk about this in a little bit, but the big idea, of course, is you've got to get measurement baked in to all your solutions. You've got to have research baked into all your solutions, and you've got to be ready to pivot a lot. And you can see that in a ton of other SaaS products that have kind of changed and morphed over time. And so having an intake process for innovation and having a way of taking in an intake process for customer requirements, man, that's got to be part of what you do. And if you don't, then your SaaS product may not last more than a year.
Yes. You know, what I might also suggest is at the same time, almost simultaneously, in this phase, you should really also start looking at internally what's going on. So, you know, as Todd is looking at the outside and the customer's needs and such, also looking internal to our customers as far as our team, you know, the impacted team. You know, I would heavily suggest at this point, it's a great time to start working out those process maps as far as what's our current state today? What are the impacted areas? What are their pain points? So that when we come into the solution phase, that we're ready to queue up what these individuals are going to need to be supported to do the thing. So we're really looking at designing that future state for the SaaS offering and addressing those key points that the team's going to need to be successful. In other words, like, what kind of skills do we need to have outlined and ready to go? What kind of background might be needed for these individuals as they're upskilling? Do we need to think about hiring? All sorts of different components that at this phase, we really want to start looking internally and how are we building some muscle for what's to come. Those process maps and kind of those gaps that are identified really allow us to visualize the needs that will arise with the SaaS solution. So we're not just necessarily dreaming up this great solution, we're also starting to begin some of the muscle needed to make it happen. And let's be honest here, you can't just turn the switch on, right? You've got to actually do some work to make that happen. And this is also a great time to start thinking about our case for change. So as we're doing all this work, we're actually putting a story together about what's going to be important. How do we do that executive summary? What's the cost impact? And not just for the solution itself, but the people involved and all the impacts that we have to consider.
Yeah. And building on what you guys have said, thinking back to the business planning phase, because again, you know, this shouldn't be like a waterfall handoff. Now we've done this and now we've done this. Like, the business planning stuff should thread through and continue throughout. And you're, you know, just think like you're building upon it and kind of blowing it out more and more and detailing it. But like, you know, Danius and Todd, as you guys were talking about testing and then getting customer feedback and thinking about the changes that are going to take place, thinking about the business plan and the pricing strategy. So again, if this is a new kind of direct to consumer offering and say this is a freemium model. So like, hey, we're going to go out there and our initial customer acquisition play is going to be the freemium, get them in the door with kind of these basic, you know, offerings and capabilities. That, hey, the strategy is we want to move them up the tiers as quickly as possible. Like, the cross-functional team needs to know that like these entry-level customers ideally are not going to stay there for long. Like, we want to move them up. We want them, you know, to get more engaged with our brand and our offerings and move up those tiers. That likely means more functionality, you know, maybe a larger number of users, whatever your structure you've gone with. But like the team knowing that, even like the initial launch, as I know Sam's going to talk a lot about, it may be this, like right behind it, it may be a lot bigger. You know, think about that now so that it's not a scramble as soon as and a surprise as soon as you know, come off your first launch.
I mean, I was gonna go a direction that maybe you didn't, because you were talking about making sure that we had a common thread between business strategy business planning down to product strategy. But I'm also at this point sort of thinking about how are we packaging up what we've done so far in a way that's really consumable for the development team as they come on board, right? Because you can have the highest performing delivery team in the world, but if they're not tightly aligned to the product strategy and business planning and all the work that we've done on that front, and it's not baked into day-to-day development in the way that we're operating, you know, with our partner as a business, like it's not going to be, we're not going to be building what is most successful for our customers and driving the metrics that we want to drive. So
Yeah. Oh my gosh, Sam, you hit it in the head. Absolutely, 100%. Especially a SaaS implementation that is massive, right? You're talking about basically the entire group of constituents within the enterprise are going to be impacted. Specifically, I love that you're thinking about our developers, because that's also where my head is. I've got like a soft spot for my development team. That being said, Carol and I we were on a recent body of work with a large enterprise that was doing just this. And so you had kind of your leadership saying, like, this is the thing we're going to do. We could have probably done a better job of getting some customer research going. And then turns out the implementation ends up being very much customization. And your developers in the meantime are like, wait a minute, I don't even know how to do the thing that you're asking me to do, because nobody gave me the runway to actually know how to do the thing. So again, it's the beauty of bringing all of these things together so we can ensure when the timing comes, not only is your development team already super aware and equipped and ready, they are also totally bought in, because they're seeing for themselves what the solution is going to offer.
I want to ask a question real quick. We're talking about, discovery and doing the right things that for the customer. What is a situation like where, the customer, says, we want this, this solution built in, and then you're in that phase and you find out what they want isn't right for them, or, and you have to say, well, you should do this instead. Like, what is that conversation like a little bit? I'm curious, just as an outsider. Anyone. It's just a free flowing.
Yeah. I'm sure we could all tell you different stories about how that conversation goes down and whether or not it's been successful and whether or not we survived it without adding to our list of scar tissue. I think that there are different ways to approach that conversation. One is by highlighting the opportunity that is there rather than talking about the one that isn't. So if you can see clearly that there's a path that they're trying to go down that's not really what you'd recommend, rather than focusing on like the no, the power of the positive no, like going into, here's a better opportunity, here's something that's stronger, and here's the data that's going to back it up, and or the customer sentiment that's going to back it up, and or whatever. You kind of have to get to know the organization and the players, because humans are variable, but what is going to be the compelling argument or persuasion for that particular set of humans, and then building your story around where you really advise them to go in that manner that's going to resonate, and trying to land it in a way. So there is absolutely an art of navigating, taking someone on it. We've all been attached to our own idea or journey that we think is the right one, and getting to the point where we feel comfortable letting to that as well. That's baked into the underlying craft of all of us as consultants, is helping people understand when they've attached to something that's not what's the best for them or their business.
Yeah. I'm lucky enough. I had a recent client engagement, and this kind of happened. And I think 100% Grace, you keep it positive, James. It's not like, oh no, goodness, don't do that. Like, it's okay. Yeah. What are you trying to accomplish? Going back to the basics, like, what is this really about? And then I was fortunate enough, and the relationship that we had, I was able to do some sessions with them in terms of like, hey, trust me here. Let's come up with a mission statement. What's your mission? What's your vision about this space that they were thinking about? Because, mission and vision statements can live at any level. It's not just enterprise level. I was like, let's do a couple sessions with your teams and let's see what is it. And then let's get to kind of a statement of what this is. And then we could kind of think about like what this could be. And it was a fantastic experience, because there were a lot of light bulbs that went off, and they were like, oh, like this we want to go here. And it was a little bit of a 180, but it actually helped get us kind of going in a better direction. But again, I was fortunate enough that the trust was there and the relationship was there. We were able to kind of do some of those foundational kind of conceptual things to kind of get everyone mentally aligned. And then we could, rethink about the problem. You don't always get that luxury. I was really lucky.
Yeah, for sure. That's a big thing at AWS, is working backwards from the customer. And I put it in the chat too. It's not just AWS. It's almost applicable to everyone on behalf of the customer. But they have this in mind: and you say, well, maybe that's not what you want. And then you kind of go back, well, let's step back. What are we trying to solve? And then let's go from there. Exactly. Danius, you had something.
Yeah, no, James, you hit that. Definitely, that's the beauty of the first phase, right? Is that you are shaping the thing with them, you are validating them, you are making sure that cross-functional leadership team is involved, you've got the right stakeholders involved. It's a people. It's I like to say it's like a tango, right? The tango is hard. There's a lot of steps to it. And to see that dance through, you better make sure it's all sequenced correctly. So we work hard at the front end. And I was just thinking, sometimes you'll see that the plan for like the whole thing for the implementation might be super heavy in the front end. And that's exactly why. You want to make sure you've done your homework, you have the data, there's data-driven decisions. So when things come up down the path, you have all that good nuggets all the way in the front that you can go back to and say, hey, I heard you say this was important to you. And so I'm wondering if we should question this decision. What do you think? And you're having that engagement with your client, with your customer.
Yeah.
Kind of pulling another Amazon leadership principle, earn trust, right? Danius, you were kind of talking about that early on conversation, Carol, you as well. But once you establish that trust and your customers have the confidence that you have their best interests in front of everything else, the conversation later on down the line gets much easier too. As you know, Todd, I don't know whether I agree with you that it's the most painful journey or whatever you said in the beginning. I like Carol's version much better. That it's a fun experience. So
there's
I hate him to say that. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you, Peter.
another metaphor I use because we're consultants and we have to live in metaphor is this upfront is like everyone's dating. But at some point, we're going to make the product and we're going to buy a house together. And that's a really different experience. And so let's make sure that we like each other enough before we go buy that house. That mortgage is expensive.
That is a really good one. I'm going to keep
especially these days. Yes.
I'm going to use it. I'm going to wedge that into a segue to go back to product roadmaps for a second. I think part of that, how do you make it less of now we have a 30-year mortgage and it's heavy and it's going to be a long road to value and a long road to ownership. I think part of this product strategy phase, one of the most important outputs of it is line of sight on the value that you're going to drive early. And when you think about those assumptions, which ones we're going to go tackle the de-risking of first, so that you can incrementally say it's more of a rent to buy situation. There are points where you're going to validate that you're making the right, so that you know that it's the right path. Sam was talking about getting the engineering teams ready and building the backlog and the plan around mobilizing teams to go do the work. Having near-term milestones is going to make that much less painful because there's clarity and there's focus that you can drive to. So coming out of that, we have this business milestone roadmap. Jeremiah, before we transition out of this phase, I think there's probably some technical stuff that we want to touch on too.
Yeah, you were touching on also previous 5 minutes of the conversations was focused on getting to business value quickly, and some of the hard conversations that we've had is identifying that first milestone that the customer enjoys, the business is going to realize value on, and that we can deliver successful on. Because getting to that point of trust is we really need to be able to deliver quickly, and identifying that milestone 1 or MVP, whatever terminology you use, that will give the business an understanding on what they're going to give the sales teams an understanding of what they can go sell to their customers, and the delivery team on what they need to build. And that could inform, early forms of the architecture and the backlog and the team structure in order to build that. So I didn't want to miss out on that point in around identifying that first milestone. Sorry. Part of that is building out and understanding transitional architectures. So one thing that is pretty common when building out a SaaS factory is to think about what the academic world and in some places in industry refer to as an architectural pattern language. And so establishing those patterns early on that will inform the team on how they build a solution is really important for setting up an evolutionary architecture, an architecture that can evolve over time in order to meet that first milestone and then move from milestone to milestone after that in order to continue to deliver value. I think that addresses like also an earlier comment around like how do you actually pivot quickly if you actually built the wrong thing or the customer needs something else. And so it kind of addresses the need to be able to change the solution quickly.
If you guys don't mind, I'm curious just among friends here, I have a question. And again, Grace, you talking about roadmaps. So do we feel like there's obviously their business strategy, product strategy roadmaps that Grace you're talking about, like Jeremiah, Sam, others, like how do you feel about having separate architecture, strategic roadmaps? Like, are these things one and the same? Are they two different things that complement, but they are separate because they're kind of different beasts? Like, I have my own belief, but I'm just curious what you guys think.
I think they have to work in parallel and tangent. The delivery side from a business perspective and the technical approach and the technical delivery has to be aligned. And the reason is because you have to understand the feasibility of actually delivering the features that are needed for a given milestone or for a given feature set. And the technical team will probably have to pay down debt and evolve the architecture over time. And so those things have to be kind of planned together. You can't do those in isolation. That's really important when it comes to, I think, SaaS products, because there's a lot of challenges with multi-tenant products or multi-tenant solutions. And every SaaS product has to solve the multi-tenant problem. And there's different ways to do that. And you're likely going to get it wrong the very first time that you do it. And you're going to have to evolve that solution over time. And all of that feeds into not only how do you operate it. So from a team that's actually running it, one of the stakeholders we touched on earlier is an internal team that's going to actually run the platform. As part of building out a product that's going to be available, you have to build out the control plane to manage that. You have to do onboarding, you have to do tenant-specific metrics, you have to do billing cycles. All of those things you have to think about alongside building a product. And so all the feature sets also require a ton of technical implementations that go along next to it. They're typically wrapped up in the control plane. And those things cannot be decoupled.
I mean, I just to add on, because you kind of asked me a little bit indirectly too, is like I'd almost think about it even more broadly than that too, which is like there's also ways of working as an organization that also has a roadmap that's probably attached to it, that's in parallel with the product and the architecture roadmap that we're building out. And like the example that I'm thinking about actually is Jeremiah, something that a SaaS journey that we were on with a client a couple of years ago, where they had a really solid on-prem solution, but it was their first journey into a SaaS product. And as we started to go through that journey with them, we started to recognize that they had an enterprise security framework and model, but it wasn't something that was going to work in the cloud. And so we were talking about this SaaS product that we were going to be building with them, and it was an example of an area where we were like, "Whoa, hold on! We need to add this big thing to the roadmap." And the thing on the roadmap is actually to go co-author a cloud operating and security model that works for the SaaS product that we're about to go build. And so in that case, it wasn't necessarily like a feature or a part of the architecture that exists, but it was a way that it was a way of working within the organization that would allow us to be able to run that product, after we, while we were developing it, but also after we released it in the wild.
Yeah, this goes back to like some of the early conversations of not only taking a product and turning it into a SaaS, but also just doing cloud modernizations. This particular client, like they had, again, products they could deploy out into each customer's own infrastructure that was on-prem, that were managed in isolation. And they wanted to turn that into a SaaS offering where they could onboard, provision, and manage tenants in a control plane. And then they also wanted to take that offering to the cloud. And not just one cloud, like multiple clouds. And so they had to consider a control plane that managed on-prem instances, AWS cloud instances, Azure, GCP. Like they had a vision that was going to cover all this. They needed to meet their customers where they were at. Their customers needed their products in their internal infrastructure and inside of their cloud environments. technical challenges with building out a control plane that has to touch multiple cloud providers and on-prem instances. That was a fun project.
That's always a challenge, right? If a control plane that needs to talk to the various application plane and they're kind of all over the place with different infrastructure behind them. Yeah, I can definitely see that as being a challenge.
Well, do we want to go into our third phase, which is really thinking about, now that we understand what it's going to take to do this kind of transformation from a cost perspective and organizationally, but also how we're going to think about our first customer base and de-risking our assumptions with a strategic roadmap. Then we move into now taking that first goalpost, that first milestone, and really getting ready to build. There's that third and final phase, and it's called lots of different things. Sometimes we call it discovery. Sometimes we talk about it as that initial valuable launch planning of like, we're really talking about value, not about some kind of technical milestone, but a value-based milestone. So maybe Sam, if you could take us through a little bit of that and how you think about getting that team ready. I know you alluded to it earlier, but I know there's more detail under that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, initial valuable launch, I think, there's a lot of different ways that you can think about that. But the way that I think we think about that and what that means to us is really identifying those first set of milestones that are going to enable us to unlock revenue and value for customers on the SaaS product that we're working with them on, right? And those customers can either be brand new customers that we're looking at enticing to want to use the product, or it can be existing customers that we're looking at migrating over from an on-prem solution or something like that. But the point is that there's kind of two different parts that I think about, that at least that I'm thinking about as we're thinking about an initial valuable launch. And number one, it's identifying the milestones and the definition of that initial valuable launch and how we're sort of slicing that and pulling all of what we've been doing together into what is the first slice of that we want to bring to our customers look like. And then the second part is, how do we start planning for the initial launch support? Because we know that it's going to take the entire organization to come together to bring this to life in probably a different way than they've been used to doing. And there's a lot that goes into that part too. So if I think about those two things, and maybe I'll riff on the first for a second, and then I'll maybe ping pong it over to a few other folks. Like if as a solution owner, one of the things that I'm thinking about as you're thinking about identifying and defining what that initial valuable launch is like, we've all been off focused on business planning and product strategy. Jeremiah's been off talking with the architects to figure out, how we need to architect the solution the right way. And in my mind, this is a really important moment to bring everybody back together to get really aligned on what does the first slice of that look like. So I'm thinking about having a definition of what the very first customer experience is going to look like as we put it out, but also in a way that pulls together everything that we need to not only wow the customer, but also to be able to operate it and scale it and support it and do all of these other things that come along with bringing a product to life at that first moment. Maybe, Jeremiah, maybe I'll ping pong it over to you. Like, I'm interested in your thoughts from a technical perspective. What am I not thinking about that you are when we think about implementation planning? And
when we earlier in the phase, we think about high level architecture, big boxes and big lines that describe like what you're going to build out, like what are the different services you might build out and what are the interactions. When you get into like the next phase of the project and actually get into implementation plan, you got to start thinking in more detail on what the architecture looks like so that you can transition and hand that off to a team for implementation. Because likely, if you're doing a SaaS product, it's going to be a pretty large endeavor, and you may have multiple teams that have to work together. And in order to do that, you typically want to break the feature sets depending on how you organize it, so each team can focus on a different feature. But you need to provide them with a technical architecture in order to go build that. And you want them to do that in a very consistent way. So that goes back to some of that architectural pattern language that I mentioned earlier. Like, you want to drive and provide consistency and accelerators across those different pods on how they build that out. And so during that time, you get into more detailed architecture. And that architecture evolution never stops. We typically don't do big design up front, so you don't architect the whole solution up front. You typically start and architect just as much as you need, and you wait to the last responsible moment in order to make a decision, to make an architectural decision. And so again, it goes back to like really focusing on an evolutionary architecture, and doing that on something like AWS is pretty easy to do given the services that they provide and can build on.
Yeah.
I love last responsible moment. I'm going to steal that.
Yeah.
Keeping up. You mentioned a lot of services. Yeah, that's almost a full-time job in itself, is just keeping up with all of our services. One of the just my comment is during this whole conversation, a lot of the things that we've touched on, in hindsight, things that we've touched on, like they seem kind of obvious, but they're things that like I've never considered. A big one is Grace mentioned the what was it exactly? The technical milestone, or not? Excuse me, the value milestones. Like, in tech, we're always used to having an MVP and a technical milestone here and there. I'd never considered myself, okay, let's have a value milestone. At this point, are we going to have this value for what we're building? Is it going to be worth it? Those kind of things.
Yeah.
So that's one of my big takeaways. Is just a lot of this stuff. Like once you say it, it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But it takes someone, like you all to actually say it. Like for me to go have that light bulb moment.
I'll give you another one on that. I had a slide up the other day that said POV, the customer's POV, and the slide was intending it to mean point of view, which is typically what POV means. And the client had proof of value. And I was like, well, that's a genius iteration on that, because that is what we're trying to say is what is the proof of value? Those milestones are your incremental proof of value that your business is on the right track and that your product is on the right track. And, we say agile and we know that means to iterate, but so frequently we as professional, holistically as an industry, we say we build, measure, learn. And what we do is we build, and we forget to come back and measure and learn. And so when you have those built-in proof of value, it forces you to say, what's my baseline data? How am I measuring against it? What data is important to me? And am I moving in the right direction, not moving at all, or moving in the wrong direction? And what do I need to learn from that? And how am I going to iterate the next POV, proof of value? So yeah, I was gifted with that from a client this week.
Nice. And to that point of data, and again, this is kind of one of those things that maybe we take for granted, but because we deal with it all the time, is just a part of what we do with our clients. But thinking about how you're going to measure. So again, going all the way back and like the actual reporting, the analytics, the data, the insights, how are you going to harvest that? And like, what's your dashboard going to look like? Like, how are you going to tap into that? And it's not just sales. It's not just, the big get going way all the way back up to the enterprise objectives. There are other like indicators that you're going to want to capture in terms of, working with a client that I did not too long ago, and we migrated to a SaaS environment. And, the things that we were watching were health indicators. So it was making sure there weren't drops, that uptime was great, that responsiveness was great. It really wasn't a revenue play like in a traditional. It was more of a reliance and just business continuity endeavor. So it was like, well, how are we going to measure that? Let's make sure we're thinking about that. Sam, as you're talking about the SO, and your role in that phase, you've got to think about just nuts and bolts like that. So you don't get to the end and it's like, oh yeah, like the whole reason we were doing this, some of the finer points, we didn't think about how we're going to measure that. How are we going to see that? Mm-hmm. And so that's something that, I know, Sam, like as an SO, you're always, all over in terms of the minutia like that.
I mean, I think you're hitting on something that's actually one of the really challenging things for an organization that hasn't operated a SaaS product before, is being truly data driven, right? Like it's one thing to establish metrics that you want to drive because that aligns with your business strategy. It's a whole nother thing to reorient your business and build those into your product and have the observability and the feedback cycles with enough agility so that you can take that feedback and quickly go, oh wait, my customers are seeing friction here, or the pricing model is hitting a snag here. We need the test and learn, right? Like that's a whole different, more mature way of operating. And I think that's one of the I think, in my opinion, the fun parts is, right, is like bringing bringing a partner along that journey, because they probably haven't been thinking about it that way. But if they want to really be successful with a SaaS product, like that's one of the key drivers.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think those SLI, service level indicators, is one way to talk about those. Another way, more academic, is like business functions. Like those things have to be considered throughout the project, not only from a customer perspective, but also from a technical architectural perspective and from a delivery perspective. And so you want to have those from a business customer perspective to make sure that they are getting the tool that they need, it's meeting their needs. You want to have it from a architectural perspective so that you can evolve the architecture over time and make sure that you don't break the architecture or break the solution. And you want that from a development perspective, because you want, to your point, you want to be able to measure how quickly a team can deliver features and how quickly they can pivot. And so by having all of those measurements in place, you can have a higher success of delivering what your customers want.
I was just going to mention one little thing, which is so fun to bring up to who you're working with at the front end of this effort is, sometimes we have clients that we work with that they're like, well, why are you bringing so many people? This is the why, right? This is not just a SaaS implementation. It is multi-pronged, multifaceted. And to Sam, your point, right? That agile way of working is when you implement that along with this effort, you see the full bang for your buck, right? And so there is so much more to gain when you have a holistic approach to this kind of work. Just wanted to add that.
Danius, I'm going to jump on something you just said, and Grace's going to go way back to something you said in the intro. Danius, you say sometimes your customers will ask you, like, why a whole team? Like, why is it this size of a team coming in to do engagement? Grace, you touched on, in your intro, you touched on that competency. Slalom, obviously, you guys have your own brand, you have an established practices, but you're also a part of our SaaS competency program. Like, what made Slalom decide, hey, I want to go and pursue or achieve the AWS SaaS competency, given you already have your own brand?
Yeah, well, we really wanted to continue the growth with the AWS Premier Tier services as a partner, and the SaaS competency, it was a goal for 2020. And when we achieved that, it was really twofold. It was to differentiate ourselves in the market and highlight our ability and commitment to helping customers really leverage modern business models and architecture to solve all of their most complex business challenges. So it was really intended to be demonstration of our commitment to our partnership with AWS as being part of this journey with you, and then also our commitment to our customers for how we're going to help them really think about business and technology and how those things come together, and not just one or the other.
Okay. And it's a big investment to achieve that designation. Now that you have it, what's been your experience with the program so far?
And I'll let others chime in here too, but we've been able to participate in various AWS programs and opportunity that help us leverage that added support for our customers with their SaaS business needs and applications. And so that distinction as a services partner accredited in both builder and design services categories for the AWS SaaS competency it's allowed us to engage our customers with an increased agility and flexibility, while continuing to take that fiercely human, which is the Slalom way, the fiercely human approach to supporting the customers on their SaaS transformation.
Cool.
Yeah, I'd say from.
Go ahead, Jeremiah.
Sorry. For me there, it's really exposed me a lot to how AWS does SaaS products. And it's opened up a lot of the knowledge base and exposed me to different teams inside of AWS for building out SaaS products.
Yeah, for us, part of the AWS SaaS competency program, is really cool for us to have a partner like Slalom, so that when we have partners, customer coming to us asking for help, because of that investment, because your expertise and your experience give us a lot of confidence when we recommend Slalom as well. So it's been a great partnership from my perspective as well. Thank you.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead, James.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, yeah, sorry, we maybe went a little off of the flow you were going for. If you wanted to jump back in, we were talking about product launches.
It was a really good segue, and I'm glad we went down that way. The only thing that came to mind, and maybe Danius, I'd love maybe your thoughts first, is just it's a good way to think about wrapping up the three phases and think about how we're setting ourselves up for build, is to really think about product launch, all the considerations that go into bringing a SaaS product, into the wild for, for real customers. Like Danius, I would love your perspective. Like, what are you thinking about when we're at that point?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, James and everyone has really spoken to so much of the human-centered aspect of it. So I've just been loving to get to sit back a bit, but kind of bringing it all together. I mean, we've talked a lot about a lot. And so what I love to think about when it comes to driving that human-centered and then the launch phase, it's how do we bring all of this together? Then going back to that connective tissue. In order to do that, we have to be super strategic. And Carol spoke to so much of this, right? But to me, I'm thinking about, first and foremost, like, do we have that dedicated key sponsor, right? Are they going to be the one to advocate and push through when things are tough? Do they understand the complexities that we're going to face and they're going to champion through? And not, by the way, step away before launch, because Sam, you and I have our passion project, right, with the dev team. And you see this too often where the key sponsor will be a part of those front end conversations. And then as soon as strategy is done, they're out of there. And then the dev team never gets to be like, to hear that messaging and to feel, appreciated. So I like to make sure, hey, you're in here for the long haul, right? And they're like, yes. Okay, cool. And the other thing is, right, we've talked about this a little bit, right? But that we're bringing these key players across all of these major parts of the org together so that we're identifying any potential tenants or risk or requirements properly ahead of time. So we're giving the required runways to those things. And we talked about this, right? Like, is there going to be an upskilling need? Is there a specific component of this that shifts the structure, right? If we're going to be coupling these agile ways of working in, like, what does that mean to our organization? What kind of fear do folks have? Is this a historically, established organization? And this is oftentimes kind of what we walk into at Slalom. We're working with organizations that are like 100+ years old. And so they have some cultural components that you have to be really cognizant of. That change just doesn't happen like that. So it takes time, additional time that we have to really wrap our heads around and be strategic about how to support those people through the change, as well as like really, Carol mentioned a component earlier about like, hey, if your go-to-market strategy is this tiered pricing strategy, what does that mean for then the teams that are going to be enabling the work? Like, what kind of approach does that mean for them? Are they going to be queued and ready to go as each phase then launches? And what does that mean for them? One thing that we didn't necessarily get a chance to talk about was a champion network. Again, bringing those folks earlier in the process really helps them get to see the why, hear it directly from those that are really driving the decisions. And then those folks become kind of your trainers and champions down the road, kind of being that bridge between, leadership and then those enablers, so that it still feels really like a supportive environment for people to be successful. And the last two things, one thing I would say is don't forget about the criticality of communication. Communication, because you know what? Any change is scary. And then talk about a change like this. What ends up happening is change starts happening up here and the folks down here will start having conversations and fear. And then all of a sudden things are completely misconstrued. So have a strong communications plan. And then the last thing, we've already touched on this. We love data-driven decisions. So if you know that the goals up front are X, Y, and Z, you better building some infrastructure to assess that as things actually start getting implemented. And that you're not just assessing them with dashboards. Data's great. They tell a story, but they're meant to be a conversation starter so that we're not stopping at just that first initial phase, that we're looking at how do we continue to grow, be competitive, and stay ahead of the rest.
Yeah. And, Danius, just to kind of complement that and for all of us to jump in on, like, we all know this is not, like, we're all product oriented and very product focused. Like, this is a continuum. So if this is like a new offering we're taking forward, like, this is just the first launch, as Sam talked about, and like thinking at launch, like the sustainment plan, the care and feeding, not throwing this thing out there and like, okay, we're on to the next thing. It's like, what is the trajectory of this look like and what's next? And we talked about the example of the pricing model of this a tiered structure and, moving customers up. But, even if that's not the case, just having the mindfulness part of launch readiness. And I know, Danius, this is what you're talking about with operational aspect. Is everyone ready to take care of this baby? like this is going to grow and it's going to have a life of its own. And so like, is customer service ready? And how is that feeding back into, customer acquisition and growing the customer base and the loyalty of it? So not just thinking about, getting it out in the wild and like, okay, woo, like this is a whole entity now. And like, how's it going to grow? And, sometimes we see some faltering there. And that's where when we're working with customers, like we're thinking about that with them too, and making sure, as we exit stage left, like that's been thought about and they're taken care of in that aspect too, to kind of carry on.
Awesome. Great. Well, I was going to say, I guess, if you were going to give any companies that were looking to start a SaaS journey or considering about it, what kind of, let's pull out just a little bit. I mean, we've gotten super deep and everything's been great. What kind of advice would you give companies, or, maybe I am a company, an individual looking to get into SaaS and see if it's right for me? I've heard, a little birdie told me that Todd has some feelings about that. So maybe we can start with him and then just hot potato it around if anyone else has any ideas.
Sure. And it's fun because I've been part of like really like I was working with a rail company that like makes trains with like 7-year like payment cycles, want to become a SaaS company. And I've worked with, software companies. And so I think the first thing I'd say is, well, one, because I'm the experience design guy. So I think the most important thing for me is like, make sure there's a reason for doing it other than I just want to get paid out every month. Like that's not a good reason. And so, but honestly, that's usually the first thing that people say. And then you have to work backwards from there. So let's make sure there's a good reason for it. Photoshop as an example. And then once you've gotten past that, I think you heard all of us say the same thing. Like, do you really want to be a software development shop? Because that's what's going to happen next for you. You're going to be a relatively nimble, agile software development shop, which is a big change for a lot of companies. So if you're excited about that journey and you want to become that company, awesome. But if you're not ready for that and you're all about kind of capital planning and funding the project for 2 years and then like moving on to the next thing that's hot, this is not a place for you, and it will not be fun, and it probably won't work. So that's so the two things: have a good reason for it other than getting paid monthly, and make sure that you're ready for that transformation.
Yeah. I mean, transformation, that's what almost every business wants to do. They always want to transform, but maybe they don't realize what they're going to get transformed into. They want their people to transform, but they don't necessarily want to transform. And so there's this whole like, the whole agile thing really upended a lot of really good old companies where, again, they want to think about funding in 1 or 2 year cycles, and they don't love this constant quarterly change. And so it's a big deal, but it's happening across the board. Yeah, for sure. Was there anything else that we missed, or did we cover everything?
I think we got through the majority of our content, really those 3 phases. The next phase would be like, we're ready to build it. So let's bring on the engineering velocity, whether it's yours or ours or and really start moving quickly. I would say the thing that if I was to leave with a piece of advice as people are starting the journey or considering, mine would be hold closely to your North Star on what it is and what it isn't. So because that will help you refine at every stage. It'll help you refine your architecture. It'll help you refine your product requirements. It'll help you define your launch strategy. And it's easy to have it clear at the beginning and then get grayer as you go down. And so keeping close to that North Star at incremental points would be my piece of advice as people start the journey.
Yeah. And I guess a little bit with North Star, Grace, like just, and a little to Todd as well, like be ready for customer expectations. Like this is just a whole different way. And like to them, and I think, James, you started out the session with like people think of like Google, or they think of, you know, a lot of like Slack, like that's, you know, that's what SaaS is. Like to them, like it's a web page. So they expect things like this. So like I think it's having the cross-functional, you know, thing in hand, like your cross-functional ops in house, and being agile and being able to like pivot and respond and predict. So like make sure operationally like you're in good shape, and kind of like Todd said, up for the challenge, because there is a level of expectation with this kind of service. Like they want it now, and you know, if you miss that mark, then a lot of your objectives are going to suffer, of course.
Yeah. My next question was going to be, I think someone didn't do their fun fact. Todd, who are we looking for? Was it Carol?
I think so. I think Carol needs a fun fact.
Am I the only one? I
can do mine. My fun fact is I've only been in tech for 2 years, and before that I was more games, but blackjack dealer. I was a blackjack dealer for 17 years. So that's my that's my fun fact.
Very nice. Well, I'm kind of similar, James. I guess, you know, you can see on my LinkedIn, I have a Master of Library Science. So as I'm educated as a librarian, I was going to pursue the rich and glamorous lifestyle of an academic librarian. And then I joined a library automation software company right out of grad school. And I've been in software ever since. So, and yes, I always get this question. Yes, you have to have a master's to be, that's a thing, to be a librarian.
Yeah, that's interesting how that segues like that. You went for library science, and then, you know, library software, and then boom, you know, more, you know, specifically software. That's so cool. Awesome.
Yeah, I'm not using Dewey Decimal very much in my day-to-day. That's for sure.
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't know how I'm dating myself. I actually used cards. I used the card system back when I was a kid. In our I don't know how many people watching Twitch can do that.
Exactly.
That was one of my favorite. The thing when they did that to check it out, it was
that
like
part too,
When I was,
that was Google back in the day, the controlled vocabulary, and dog is canine. I need to go look at.
Yeah.
One of the most disappointing things was I was a library page when I was a kid, and so I learned Dewey Decimal pretty well. And then I went to college, and it was all Library of Congress. So that understanding did me no good whatsoever.
Oh. Yeah, I don't even know Library of Congress almost anything. So that would be, I'd all of a sudden have to relearn everything for sure. I was gonna. That's what I was gonna ask. This is to anybody. Is Slalom going to be doing like? I'm sure you're going to reInvent. Is there going to be? You want to talk about that real quick, or are there any other summits, conferences, anything like that we can look forward to?
We are definitely going to be at reInvent. We're a gold sponsor, so we're going to have a booth.
Yeah.
So please come by and see us. We would love to chat. We also have a blog. I think you've had several of the links to the different blog posts that are as our thought leadership blog and various topics. A lot of them are related to what we've talked about today, but there's tons of other topics around, generative AI and other things that are relevant to this moment in time that show up there. LinkedIn is a great place to find us. Obviously, we put a lot of stuff there. Am I missing anything?
What is? Oh, here we go. We got one from the chat here. Let me pull it up. IoT Guru had a question for us. Where is it? What is Slalom's most favorite events, USA or globally? And I'm sure one person can answer this because one person knows what Slalom's favorite event is.
I think we probably all have our own favorite events, right?
No, I know. Yeah. I will. I'm going to reInvent this year, so I will definitely stop by and say hi, and wave and say hello. And just to kind of close out from my end, our famous AWS surveys. That's everyone knows our surveys. It's legendary. Oh, and we mentioned generative AI. I have like a mini bet in my head, like to see how many weeks in a row we can go with without even me prompting it, like the generative AI pops up into a conversation. It's just like, it's the biggest deal on the planet at the moment. It's incredible. Like, I think last week someone said that their grandparents were talking about it, and they know, when your grandparents are talking tech, that it's probably going to be a big deal.
My 14-year-old talks about it, and she didn't know what Gen I was. And then I gave her an example. She's like, "Oh, you mean I can like generate a picture when I type it?" She's like, "Yeah, I know that. That's like so yesterday."
Yeah.
So my 14-year-old talks about it too. But yeah, life is complete now. Gen AI, checkbox that.
You're
Okay.
welcome. You're welcome. I worked that in strategically.
When as the designer, whenever I have to give a talk about generative AI, I always lead with the fact that I got a B in stats, and therefore I'm completely viable to talk about generative AI. And then we move on.
I still feel bad for like good old virtual reality. Like I feel like VR is like in the corner. Like, what about me? I'm just like, I'm here. I've been on the scene. Like, does anyone love me? I'm still a big believer. I'm hoping VR hits it big, but Gen AI is completely lapped them.
Yeah. I dropped the link for the survey in the chat, and please fill it out. It's all for our show. Please let us know. Again, it goes into my old saying, known unknowns, unknown unknowns. We don't know what you liked or what to capitalize on. We don't know what to do better unless you tell us. Please tell us. Also in that is, if you'd like to connect with Slalom, just drop your email in there. It's not required, but if you thought everyone was great, which they are, please go ahead and drop that email, and I will pass along to our awesome partners. I guess before as we close out, is there anything anyone else would like to plug? Just one last thing. Are you TikTok famous? Do you have a pet cat, Instagram, something, anything like that for fun?
You're supposed to follow my SoundCloud. Like, isn't that a thing?
Are you a SoundCloud rapper? Yeah.
No.
Those kind of things.
Before you said that, I was going to say, I'm looking right at you, Todd. You're smacking the center of my screen. TikTok famous.
Yeah.
No, thank you so much for having us. It was great. We really love our partnership with AWS, and it's moments like this that we can have together to talk about what's important to us and our customers with you. Is aligned with how we think about doing business and partnership with AWS and our customers. So thank you.
Awesome. Great. Yeah, thank you very much. Like I said, I had a lot of light bulb moments. And please join us next. Please fill our survey. And also, please join us again next week, Wednesday, 2 p.m. Pacific time. We will be having IBL Education come on and talk with us and with my friend and co-host, Art Toison. And it should be fun and interesting. So from all of us at Howdy Partner, thank you very much. Have a good day and happy trails.